Hello again, and the subject of this short video is emotion. When we think of emotion, I think we should be thinking of motivation and demotivation, because emotion is at the heart of both of those. Whether we are emotionally intelligent to the extent that we are able to know what our emotions are, to be able to name them, to be able to acknowledge them or not. Emotions, for all healthy people anyway, are absolutely core to their motivation and demotivation. And so if you think about it, coaches are trying to, as part of their raison d'etre, is to look at issues and look at a coachee converting any issue to a target or goal, or where the coachee brings a goal or target, to be coaching them to have a sustainable success with that target. And necessarily emotion will be part of that. Now, I'm not saying that every coachee all of the time should be growing their emotional intelligence and their understanding of emotions and naming them and acknowledging them to enormous degrees of change. Emotional growth is a life journey, and we can accelerate it, of course, but and the coaching will be part of that, but it's unlikely to be a massive part of coaching more than therapy or counselling or just the process of life itself. However, since it's so important, it may be useful one way or another for us to be able to measure that. Now, for some of the people, some of the time, they will have great emotional intelligence, they will understand their emotions, they'll be able to share them with you, depending on the setting, depending on the relationship, and so forth. Other people will be reticent about that and will not want to do that and will not see it as part of coaching, in spite of your setting the scene, in spite of you having set the boundaries and saying, well, you know, emotions are okay, some people may cry, some people don't, la la la. Those sorts of things to give them a sense. They may not choose to go there. Doesn't mean they don't have emotion, it just means they don't want to express it. Of course, it doesn't also mean that they necessarily are able to name their emotions because they can't express it, but and by the same token, they, on the other hand, may actually know very well what their emotions are and just choose not to share them with you. But as coaches, we need to get a sense of what that is and how that will look in terms of motivation. Simplest way of doing that, of course, is to ask them, 0 to 10, how committed, how motivated are you, and see if you can sense that that message is an authentic one or not. If they say, oh, yeah, I'm really, really motivated, the chances are that they're not. Unless that's always how they speak, they never vary, even when they're excited and obviously excited and anxious to leave you and get off and do something, they still speak like that. Then there may be an exception to the normal, common thing that you see with human beings, that psychological states change, creating physiological changes that you can spot. As coaches, we can get some measure on that, not necessarily by tackling the emotion directly, but by handling it in a different way, by asking the specific question about motivation and commitment. There are times in the coaching relationship where that degree of under-emotion may not be terribly helpful. We may want to encourage someone to have more emotional contact with their material. Doesn't mean they have to express it. We shouldn't look to them to express to us. It's just that they might have an emotional experience over there with them, rather than necessarily having to share it with you and then checking out afterwards to what extent that was useful or not. So there are plenty of occasions where it's maybe useful for them to feel, particularly if they've got, say, a long-standing feud going on with someone else in their lives, or at home or work or elsewhere, which hasn't been resolved. It may be quite useful for them to get to the heart of that if they seem a little detached. Get a sense of what the core of that is, somewhere internal, rather than necessarily being perhaps a bit logical and a bit clinical about reasons rather than feelings. On the other side of that coin, of course, is the people who, during a coaching session, become so emotional that they are no longer able to take reasoned logical, sensible, cognitive direction to where they want to get to. And in that situation, we might want to get them out of that particular emotion, not to block it, because everyone, well, most people most of the time, may need to express that emotion, and that, as a coach, one has to be able to sit with the emotion, to listen to it, maybe to reflect back, to make sure that they know that you've heard and understand, and to check with them about that. But when they're ready, and invite them to be ready to move from an unhelpful emotional thing, could again be about a conflict somewhere that upsets them, to get to a distant place. Now, we mentioned the last thing about perceptual positions and moving perhaps to the second and third position. There's an instance where moving to the third position might be very, very useful. And it also helps them to understand that if they get upset in another context, they only have to say, oh, I wonder if there's a more resourceful, calm place that might be 6 inches over there, and when I move that 6 inches I might just feel calmer and breathing easier and less tormented and less anxious when I move to that place. That whole business assists them in moving from that emotional place to something that's likely to be more useful in the coaching context. People are paying you to be coached. We can spend some time listening and allowing that expression so that it's well heard and they know it's heard, but they're paying us, of course, to move on. And we can't do that while they're paralysed by their feelings. So at some point we need to work with them, find the space that we can move on, and make sure their emotional state is in the right place, is resourceful enough for them to move on. One last thing. The thing about, I did mention about, emotional growth, it's a life journey. Of course it is, but the one key element of growth, of personal growth, and particularly from an emotional perspective, is feedback. That's specific feedback from people, and that's as true for coachees as it is for coaches too. So that's about us. It's very easy to get complacent, it's very easy to feel great, very easy to feel that we're doing a very good job, and it's very easy also, because time moves on, to get out of touch. People's expectations change, the world changes, but if we ask for specific, we have that discipline, we have that habit of asking for specific feedback, then that specific feedback, whether we like it or not, can give us the opportunity to begin to learn more about our thinking, more about our feeling, and more about how other people see us and experience us in the world, and to make differences, to make changes in our own time, if we choose to do so. And that's a bit of self-coaching, I guess. So that's enough about emotion for this video, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Thank you.